Hey guys, so I realized this morning it's been a little while since I've done one of these vlogs. I was hoping to do one a week, but I got real busy working on that timber frame table and it was under a bit of a timeline, so a lot of long days and not a lot of video, but I figured we'd do one on materials. We talked about getting started and what was the other one? Design. And then so yeah, if you got your design all laid out, now you got to talk about what materials you want to make your knife out of. So this is one of the most common questions for sure that I get all the time is where do you get materials? And all materials, steel, handle materials, wood or synthetics, or antler, and even down to like pins or we could talk about glues briefly. All of them in leather for sheaths and stuff. So let's start at that end and we'll work our way back to the bigger questions. So my leather, I like to order my leather from Springfield Leather in Missouri, in Springfield, Missouri. Those guys are awesome, and I know a couple of the employees through Instagram and knife making and stuff, and if you call them up and talk to Liz, she'll hook you up. She really knows what she's talking about, knows way more about leather than I do, and her work on her leather sheets is like top shelf stuff, really good stuff. So Springfield Leather, and unfortunately it gets a little bit pricey shipping some of that stuff up here to Canada. I get pretty hooped on some of the tariffs and taxes and stuff like that. So if you're in Canada and Springfield's not an option for you, you can always go with Tandy, and those guys, both of those shops just have everything you could possibly need, and they're all real experienced with leather work, so they can help you out. And that's where I get everything to do with leather stuff, from dyes and all that crap, all from Tandy, or Springfield as well, and like hardware and everything. Next, we could talk about pin material. The mosaic ones are the ones that people ask the most about, with the little animals or the mosaic designs and stuff. I get those from an Instagram account called Mosaic Knife Pins. There's two of them. There's Mosaic Knife Pins and Custom Mosaic Pins, I think, are the two. They look like they're both exactly the same guy, but apparently they're not. One guy taught the other guy, and then he did his own thing, but they're both really good, and they're from Pakistan, and I know it's kind of sketchy ordering stuff from that area of the world. We all have a little bit of a stigma about that, but those guys I can vouch for. They're really good. They're just dudes like us trying to make a living off of our craft, and they do really good work, and they come through, and yeah, that's where I get those from, and I know a lot of other guys do too, and it's really cool, a little cool feature, little piece in your knife. Other pins you can get from all of these materials, from after leather, from pin material, hand material, and steel. You can get all that stuff from, there's some knife making suppliers online. In Canada, there's basically the only one in Canada is knifemaker.ca. They are Canadian Knife Maker Supply, and they're just north of Calgary, Alberta, and they've got basically everything you can need to make a knife, including the other sheath material is Kydex. I don't mess around with Kydex too much. I'd like to do a little more in the future, but not right now. But Kydex you can get from these suppliers as well, and that's like going to be your safe bet. If you just want to get stuff that's for sure just for knife making and it's all going to work, then you can go and talk to these guys, these knife making supply shops. It's what they do, and they've got everything you can need and a good variety, a good selection of it. So quick Google will find you a couple suppliers in the States. I know Jantz is one, and then there's definitely a few more, but those guys are all pretty good. Shop around a little bit and see what everyone's got. So so you can definitely get lots of different types of pin material there. I like to get some stuff from, here's this stuff. This is Brazing Rod, and it comes by the pound, and it comes from any welding supplier, and you can get 16th inch, 8th inch. There's a few different diameters. This is stainless steel. Sometimes they will have solid brass as well, but a lot of it's going to have flux, either flux coating on it for the welding, and you don't want that. So you can just get the solid stuff. If you don't want to get a whole pound of it and you're just doing, you just want to try a knife or two, then that's a bit of bulk for you. So I would hook up with one of those supply shops online and see what they got. And brass is nice to use because it's nice and soft. Stainless is just solid. Stainless is great. You can get copper as well, be a little bit more money probably. And there's lots of there's carbon fiber out there and different things like that for pin material. All right, away from those, let's go with handle material. That's a big one. Where do you get all this wood? Where do you get those crazy resin cast synthetics? All the resin cast stuff comes from other suppliers online. I've tried doing a little bit myself, and it's just one of those extra things I just don't have time to mess with. I'm hoping to do more of it in the future, but for now, just go with the pros. There's a few dudes online who do it really well. The ones that I use the most are Jehu Customs and Exotic Knife Handles, and those two guys they're just the two that I happen to use the most often. There's lots of other ones out there, but those two particular guys that I've used, I've had great experience with. Their products have been fantastic, and there's just so much cool stuff that they do. I always tag them too in any of the knife handles that I use. So if you look back at my photos and you see one of their crazy cool handles, they'll be tagged in it. And for woods, all these woods, obviously one of my favorite guys to use is Pete in Hawaii. Pete's Custom Koa for koa and mango. His stuff is second to none. But there's lots of other guys. There's Rock and Blocks is another Instagram account. He's got lots of cool koa and walnut and all sorts of different stuff. There's lots of suppliers on Instagram that have got all these things. Also, if you want to try and shop around locally a little bit, you can see if there are any cabinet makers that you know of around town. They sometimes have offcuts. The nice thing about a knife is you only need a small piece. So try to hook up with some cabinet makers, or maybe someone's putting down some really cool hardwood flooring. The only thing is you want to be careful about stabilizing for softer woods. The harder stuff won't actually stabilize, and if you want to know about stabilizing, I've explained it a couple of times here and there, but again, if you Google stabilizing wood, there will just be guys who can explain it way better, and with video and stuff. But your softer woods you want to stabilize if you're going to use them for a handle for sure. So be careful about getting, some guys will say, oh, I got this really cool piece of birch or whatever, but you want to stabilize that for sure. That's where I get some of my, I happen to know a couple of great cabinet makers, and they hold on to some pieces for me. Other guys, lots of buying from Instagram accounts. Trading with other knife makers is always fun. You always throw a few extras in there and see what you get, and it's pretty cool. Good to support each other that way for sure. I'm just looking around at the different woods and stuff I've got on these shelves. Antlers, another one. You can definitely buy antler online as well, or if you live somewhere where there's a lot of hunting, talk to some guys and see if they've got some antler around. Usually they'll love to trade you a whole bunch of, or a whole rack, an elk rack for a knife or something like that. Those guys love trading. So antlers, tricky to work with. It's really hard on your cutting, on all your tools, all your tooling and stuff. It's hard on it. There's no way around it. But you got to watch out for the pith in the middle. It's all that holy stuff in the middle there, you don't want that to be exposed at all on your knife handle, so you got to be really careful about that. The outside is great. Antler's nice and hard. You can stabilize it as well. It's not a bad idea to do that, but it's grippy even when it's wet. It's awesome stuff, and it turns out nice if you polish some of that off too. If you got a piece that's kind of wrecked or whatever and you polish it down, but you don't want to be shaping it so much that you end up in that pithy core. So be careful working with that stuff, but it can be pretty sweet when you get it down. So that's basically all my handle material, where I get all that. The stacked birch bark stuff, I just process it myself from birch that I chopped into firewood, and I save the bark and it's a big process to get it down to the little pieces that I can actually use. Leather too, the stacked leather, you just, you know, save your scraps from your sheaths and use that. Yeah, there's most of what you can find are either online on knife making websites or through other Instagram accounts. There's lots of trading going on around. Steel's the big one. Where do you get your steel? A lot of the time I will buy it from steel suppliers. In the States there's lots of them. All those knife making websites have all kinds of different steels. The cool thing about them too is some of them will have a heat treating service. If you're in Canada and you use knifemaker.ca, they will heat treat anything that they sell you to, which is nice if you don't have a heat treat setup, particularly for stainless. I use them for my stainless and they do a great job. You can you can buy steel. New Jersey Steel Baron is one. They're great in the States. You know, you shop around, try to do your research on what steel you want to use. If you're just getting started, I would recommend something real forgiving and inexpensive, like a 1084, 1095, something like that. Even 1095 is a little finicky if you're depending on your heat treating situation. 1084 is a nice, inexpensive, forgiving steel. It's a good one to go with. If you want to try and salvage some steel, use some reclaimed stuff, that gets tricky. And you never know what it's actually made of. Bandsaw steel is usually pretty great. Big circular saws, circular blades from the mill, those are usually pretty good. Not railway spikes, not you know, rebar. Don't make a knife out of that. You know, it's not. It looks cool, especially everyone loves making those railway spike knives, but they're just not good steel. It's not going to hold an edge. So you want something that's going to be good, solid steel that's got a high carbon content that you can heat treat. So that's a big one. I just this morning, I got a whole bunch of great big round saw blades, and I kind of rolled the dice on it because I had to buy them before I could take a piece and test it to see if I could heat treat it. So, you know, I had my fingers crossed and cut out a chunk. Tried heat treating it like I do with most of my normal monocarbon, you know, 1084 steels, and luckily it worked. Hardened up just fine, skates the file, so I got kind of lucky there. You know, it's a bit of an educated guess, depending on, you know, how much experience you got salvaging steel, but, you know, leaf springs or coil springs, you know, and then that spring steel is usually pretty good, particularly if it's older. Same with, you know, the big saw blades, the older ones. Especially if they're all one piece. If they've got the little brazed on tooth, then that gets a little bit tricky because sometimes that tooth is the good steel, and the body of the blade they cheap out on. So you got to be really careful when you're salvaging steel because you never really know what's in there, and you don't know even if it's like a really good high carbon alloy steel that would be great for a knife. Maybe you don't have the heat treat set up to harden it. So it's always a bit of a gamble, but if it pays off, then it's a whole lot cheaper salvaging steel than buying sticks of stuff. So bit of a toss-up. If you're just getting started and you just want to fool around, for sure, just go and, you know, find a chunk of steel. Especially if you're just practicing and you just want to make yourself a knife, then that's the way to go for sure. Find some chunk of something and cut it into a shape and see what you can make. But definitely, if you're getting into this as kind of a trying to make a few bucks, then you want to, especially if you're selling it to someone, you want to be absolutely sure that it's going to be good steel. You don't want to be risking it with your customers, because the worst thing that can happen is, you know, a bad review. So keep that in mind, and and lots of people love too the bit of a story behind it. If you're reclaiming it from a sawmill or something, they like some of that. Sometimes if it's old, it's got some pitting in it, you can leave that in the blade, and that looks really cool too. So that's where I get my materials. That's all I've got to say about that. So if you guys have any questions, definitely let me know. Also, if you have any ideas or anything you guys want me to do one of these on, then drop me a comment somewhere or whatever. These are going to be on Facebook and YouTube, even though it takes me like 10 tries to upload to YouTube and it's a pain in the ass, but I'm trying to do it for you guys. So I'll get them up on YouTube for you. All right, that's it. Peace out.